That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about Unstoppable, the directorial debut of Oscar-winning film editor William Goldenberg, which premiered at the 2024 Toronto International Film Festival. Amazon MGM Studios is releasing it January 16th, 2025.
Directorial debut.
As I said, an Oscar-winning film editor who won his Oscar for editing Ben Affleck's Argo, who is, of course, a EP on this.
Noted. What is Unstoppable about? It centers around the life of wrestler Anthony Robles, who was born with one leg and won a national championship in 2011 while competing at Arizona State University. What is your pull quote?
The critics will mew and every underdog will have his day, but Unstoppable is a glossy elemental play on the same familiar impossible obstacles to overcome, except there's no investment for us to feel much when it is done.
Agreed. Mine. Unstoppable fails to deliver the emotional beatdown one would expect from this type of underdog sports story. Yeah, that premise is as simple as this movie feels. And I feel like it doesn't, there are some better stories within this young man's story that I think should have been the focus of the movie.
And it's based on his own memoir, and there are 3 screenwriters, but there are no levels in the screenplay.
The story is that we meet Anthony Robles as a teenager in high school, played by
Jerome,
who I know as the from Moonlight.
He is in Moonlight. We reviewed him in Concrete Cowboy. He's in Ava DuVernay's When They See Us.
So, as the premise mentions, he was born with one leg. We see him wrestling as a high school student. He's quite good. And his goal is to go to Iowa State with a wrestling scholarship. But they're not checking for his ass. In fact, the only school checking for him is a school called Drexel. And they offer this fool a full ride, tuition, room, board, and a stipend. But he's cool on that because he doesn't think they have a good program. Keeping in mind that
I just remember Drexel is the character played by Gary Oldman in True Romance. Anyway, sorry, keep going.
Wow. I'm glad you cleared that blockage. But he doesn't want to go to Drexel because they don't have a good program. Now all of a sudden he wants to go to Arizona State, and we find out later it's because his home life is not the best. He lives with his mom, Jennifer Lopez. Judy, who works at Target. And
we don't ever see her at Target.
No, we see her red shirt and her name tag.
I wanted a scene with J-Lo at a checkout or stocking shelves at Target. I want to see that.
Or working the self-checkout. Charging folks for bags.
Because back in the day, J-Lo's romantic comedy, she was one of the few people we'd actually see working in films.
Sure.
Like Made in Manhattan, etc.
But he lives with his mom, J-Lo, his stepdad, Bobby Cannavale.
Rick.
Who's a corrections officer. And then he has a whole bunch of, half brothers and sisters.
I actually don't even, there's an older one and 3 younger ones.
Or 4 or 5.
None of them characterized. We need to talk about them.
But the family dynamic is rough because mom and dad have this kind of lukewarm, abusive relationship.
Yes.
So Anthony doesn't want to stray too far from his family. They live in Arizona, so that's why he ultimately wants to get into Arizona State University.
Mesa.
So he does get a meeting with the wrestling coach there, played by Don Cheadle. And Don Cheadle says, well, our program's very selective. To be honest with you, you didn't make the cut, but your high school coach, played by
Michael Peña.
Is he from the Toast Jelly Side Down movie?
I believe he is in Devil. He's in a lot of films we've seen. He's also...
Don Cheadle is good personal friends with Peña. So he says, that's the only reason I'm meeting you. But, I can't offer you much except a walk-on spot. But that means you're not guaranteed to be on the wrestling team, and you'd have to pay to go to school here. And next thing we know, we see him starting freshman year at Arizona State University. And then the next hour of the film is him, we get several montages of him training, wrestling.
Yeah, suffering the slings and arrows, yes.
Of course, there needs to be some obstacles. One of them is that he loses a match to this Minnesota guy who's the top spot wrestler. So of course he wants his day to get revenge. But also, we find out that all of a sudden, I think it's his sophomore year, the wrestling program at Arizona State University gets cut completely.
And I was reading that in reality, it was only cut for 2 weeks before it came back. In this film, it characterizes that time as a year passing.
But, that time that passes is not filled with much, but we do see the coach bring Anthony back and says, hey, I have some news for you. Some alumni have decided to fund the wrestling program. That's the good news. The bad news is that the amount of money they're giving means that we have even fewer spots. Because at this point, Anthony has made the wrestling team. He's just not the top player. But he says, we decided to take a vote to see if your teammates want to donate some of their scholarships to let you go to school here. And we can get back to that scene, but ultimately he does get to come back. And then it ends with him beating that top spot guy. So I guess he wins the championship.
Whose dad/coach is played by Shawn Hatosy, who has nothing to do.
No. And then that's the end of the movie. He wins that championship. Okay. Let's start with what we liked about the movie. I think since we did give J-Lo top spots in our worst...
She had a rough year last year,
yeah,
to say the least.
Not only in acting, but also hair.
And in life.
Mm-hmm. So I will say, I did think that her performance in this movie was better than I've seen in a long time.
She was fine. She did everything she needed to do.
Yeah.
She wasn't too distracting.
Or shrill.
She seemed like a lovely mother.
Yes. Well.
That made bad choices.
Who made bad choices?
But don't we all?
But we all do. Okay. And I also liked the I liked the kids playing the brothers and sisters.
They're fine, but they're just, can you tell any of them apart?
Well, but sticking to the positive.
Okay. All right.
I did think that those kids together were cute at times, but I totally agree with you. I think that's, and the soundtrack. Because I think, to stick with positive stuff, but I did think the movie looks kind of cheap, like a Lifetime movie. So I was surprised when we heard so many songs that I recognized.
It was shot by Salvatore Totino, who has worked on very big budget films, including Everest, which I thought was okay, in '65, which is terrible, and Spider-Man: Homecoming. But the soundtrack, I knew this was set in sometime in the 2000s, but I was unclear of when based on the soundtrack, because the first blast of music I think I get was Jimmy Eat World.
Well, then we get some Nas in there from like 96. Yeah, I was a little confused.
When Nas plays, I'm like, wait, when is this set?
Yeah. No, it's set in the mid to late noughts. But, okay, what didn't work for me? I don't like the look of the film. I already mentioned that. I also think that we learned some stuff about this young man, and specifically his mother, that I find more interesting than what we're getting. So my main issue is I think that his mother is more interesting than he is.
I agree. Mm-hmm.
So his mother it's alluded to that maybe she was very young when she had him, like a teenager who didn't even get to finish school.
Yes.
So that would mean that the woman playing his mother, or the mother in this movie, should be in like her mid-30s.
Yes.
But J-Lo's not in her mid-30s. She doesn't look like she's in her mid-30s. There was another movie recently.
Atlas.
Oh, Atlas, where it's like, I think she's also a little too old for that character.
The math is not mathing in the script. We need to change just one little thing and then it all makes sense.
Okay, so then the mother is supposed to be this like young mother who made some bad choices, has all these kids. We find out, when you see J-Lo and Bobby Cannavale, and then you see Anthony Robles played by
Jharrel Jerome,
who's clearly like biracial, black, that these are not maybe both of his biological parents. So we find out that he was conceived outside of her marriage to Bobby Cannavale. Like she had him before. And Bobby Cannavale doesn't consider him to be his son. He treats him like, you should be grateful that I even take care of you. But the mom, trying to raise these kids in this abusive relationship, we don't find out until the end of the movie via some text that the mother ended up, of course, leaving the husband, going back to school. She got her PhD in education and became the associate dean of students at ASU. I thought that was way more impressive. I would have preferred to see a movie about this mother. And then include her son as like a really, like, look what she was able to accomplish and look at her kid.
Partly because maybe she was also motivated by what her child was able to do, because I think there's a limit to where Anthony Robles' career goes. And of course this is an underdog story, and of course representation is powerful, but characterized in this way, like you could have plopped this story into any other sports drama.
That's my other issue. I don't find the portrayal of this young man very compelling. I didn't really care for the actor playing him.
He's fine, but it's played with such kind of nobility. There really are no levels. Of course, there's some emotional exchanges with Jennifer Lopez, but there are no levels. We don't see him in class. We're spoon-fed everything. We're told everything. Like, he's worked full time. We do see him at work. I didn't realize that was full time. Like, I don't see how this man, there's no texture, there's no grit to it.
Well, let's talk about that, because that is my big issue. I think the most compelling part of this young man, well, it's twofold. One, it's obvious that, like, if you're wrestling with one leg compared to people with two legs, it's probably more challenging.
Yeah.
I was expecting a better examination of the actual, like the skill of the sport, and how we really don't get any mention of like how much harder he has to work or the techniques he has to use.
He has to be, his training is going to be a little different. Just like
Right.
not having a leg kind of affects your weight and the weight class that you're in.
Or even that part, yeah. I mean, I felt like the procedural aspect of this one-legged wrestler wasn't like I needed more detail, because it's interesting.
It's interesting. Just like how it's interesting how he paid for school at ASU. There's no conversation, no FAFSA conversations. Like,
There's
come on
no
now.
conversation of how much it cost. Are his parents helping him? How we see he works with McKelty Williams at a private airport, and he cleans these private jets. Mm-hmm. I mean, is that enough money to pay for 4 years of university? I don't know. Like, but this young man putting himself through school, living in an abusive home, being this one-legged wrestler and being very good at it. And then we get, of course, the ubiquitous training montages.
Yeah.
It should be much more impressive than it feels. It just feels very like he's a stubborn teenager who wants to do this thing. I got no sense of the importance of wrestling to him or what this final match will do for him. And ultimately, it doesn't do much, because we find out at the end via some text that he went on to become a public speaker, and currently he is the wrestling coach at the high school he went to. And we're told in the movie, wrestling doesn't make money. Mm-hmm. So, and of course I want to compare this film to The Fire Inside.
Well, only because it's released so close together.
But there are a lot of parallels.
There are.
And I think The Fire Inside works so much better, because the subject and the actor playing her are much more dynamic. But also, I think that movie and Barry Jenkins' script is smart in focusing on the aftermath of her winning the gold medals. And I think this movie would have been smart to focus on his home life and how he was able to put himself through school. Mm-hmm. I feel like the wrestling part is like secondary to what this young man was able to accomplish.
I agree, because it just seems like, boom, this happened, and then what? Like, it's happily ever after. That's how these kind of endings tend to seem.
There are a lot of corny moments. Like, yeah. I think when he gets accepted to ASU as a walk-in or walk-on, we get like a training scene where they have to like run laps, and it just all felt very like by the book. Then we get a scene. He actually ends up at the footsteps where Rocky, like in Philly, when he runs up the stairs, and we actually see Rocky's footprints and he's standing on them. But then we get something similar where he's forced to hike up a trail. And so that's made reference to more than once.
That scene is very similar to this Michael Fassbender, Taika Waititi sports film. I'm forgetting the name of it, that came out, was it last year?
I thought it was a little hokey. Mm-hmm. Okay, the relationship between J-Lo and Bobby Cannavale. I really like Bobby Cannavale.
I do too.
I think it's hard to take him seriously as like a D-bag stepdad. And a lot of his dialogue felt like maybe this actor wasn't the best at delivering some of this dialogue. Because he's supposed to be rough around the edges, and sometimes he talks with like a youthful swagger that felt a little like...
Well, Bobby Cannavale still looks really good, so it's like this man that's maybe mourning the loss of his youth and his waning power, and probably has some other...
There's no depth to that character.
There isn't.
He's just an asshole.
And manipulative, and there are people very much like that, but I kept wanting it to be more along the lines of This Boy's Life with Robert De Niro. and which I don't know if you've seen that, but
You've referenced it before.
Yes, with Leonardo DiCaprio and Ellen Barkin. But yeah, this woman with this kid that this man doesn't want around, and so he treats him like shit.
But the relationship at home, I felt like didn't you think it should feel more like devastating and traumatic? It feels very like, I mean, I was holding my breath like, oh my God, they're going to get into a fight.
Well, and
they never do.
That's how it is living in a household with parents like that, is the kids are constantly on edge holding their breath.
Right, and this film doesn't convey that very well. There's clearly tension. The mom recognizes that the stepdad is kind of a jerk to Anthony. It does all culminate in a physical altercation, which we don't really see, but we see that J-Lo has bruises. Bobby leaves. Then he comes back, and J-Lo's portrayal of this woman who just can't let go of this man who she doesn't need in her life is a little silly. And then we see that she ends up getting a big tattoo when he comes back that I thought was laughable, because I just think that it needed to be a younger woman who seems a little more silly and not as self-assured.
Well, J-Lo playing this person seems like, oh, so you're just, I guess, dumb. But,
right.
But, a sleeve of tattoos, those cover up bruises conveniently.
So another corny scene. I mean, I just have a list of corny scenes. At one point, their home gets foreclosed, and you have J-Lo in the driveway yelling at the banker. Then we get a montage of her, because it's made clear that she's been disabled by this husband of hers. Like, he doesn't include her in any of the, admin stuff of their relationship. So we get this montage of her trying to call the mortgage company to get a copy of the mortgage. Then we see her go to like legal Zoom. And then she learns that what she had was a predatory loan. And I thought the most crunchy moment is when she goes to the mortgage company, sits down in a huge conference room with the man who came to foreclose on her house. And she says, well, the law says that you provided me with a predatory mortgage and I can do this, this, and this, which will ruin you. So instead, I'm asking for an 18-month extension. And then that's it.
Yeah.
But how is she going to pay that? Like, it's just, I wanted the details, the struggle.
And also, banks don't really fold. But
another corny scene is her having to sell plasma. And Anthony finds out and pulls her out of the plasma line, and they have J-Lo looking all sweaty and gaunt.
She's being depleted.
Because she's being depleted of her fluids. And I didn't quite understand why the son was so upset about this.
He is so upset. Well,
He's acting like she's hooking. She's just selling some fluids. Like,
I mean, we're all selling something, but yeah, I mean, that's distressing for a kid to see your mom maybe doing that, but it's like, could have been worse.
Okay, on top of the brothers and sisters not having much character, we also see that like 5 years passes and the younger kids don't get older. I found that very distracting.
It's like, what are they, vampires?
Because
like,
kids who are like 4 and 5, they age very quickly.
They have growth spurts,
The older ones, maybe, but the younger ones, I thought it was funny because we also get like freshman year, sophomore year, senior year, and these kids still look the same.
But and then I think we were talking during the film that this feels very much constructed like a television film. But it's like, if you think back in TV films from the 90s, they would have done age progression on these children because...
Well, those movies back then...
We're trying to be good.
They had a point to prove.
Yeah, they were trying to say that we could be quality, we could make quality television. And this feels like cut corners.
I do think the best part of the movie, which was probably because had been waiting for this, is Anthony finally does confront his stepdad.
Oh, the catharsis of violence, yes.
And yes, exactly, which, I shouldn't feel that way, but because this film didn't give me much, I was very excited to see Anthony take down Bobby, which basically puts him in a headlock so that J-Lo can call the police and he gets taken away. Oh gosh. I feel bad because it's just a series of scenes I didn't like. So the high school coach, Mr. Peña.
Michael Peña is out here in this universe and everybody's very cold towards him.
That's my next note. So he shows up at the house and J-Lo answers the door and she acts like she doesn't even know who this man is. And it's like, wasn't this your son's high school coach who fostered his career and got him into college?
His shining beacon? Yeah.
And she just answers the door like he's a salesperson and he has this big box and he goes, here. And she takes it. Well, what is this? Okay, well, thank you. And he's like, well, hold on. I think you're a really great mom. Like, he's trying to compliment her on how great her son turned out and it has to be due to her. And I really think you should read the letters in the box. So we find out that the box is filled with all these like fan letters to Anthony, which I thought was so weird because I didn't get any concept of him being like someone who kids would know to write to. But then
Like locally, I don't know.
maybe. But she takes that box, closes the door on his ass, and then when Anthony comes home, she's reading them crying. And at one point she says, "I thought God was punishing me, and that's why you were born this way." And then she starts telling him about how he's...
Like an old Betty Davis movie.
It was just so weird because the way she's talking to him, like he's special and she loves him, I never got the sense that she didn't make him feel that way.
Right.
She seemed like a loving mom.
Yeah, except for would be subdued by the abusive husband sometimes.
It would have made sense to me if Bobby Cannavale had read those letters and had a moment with Anthony where he apologized and said, I took you for granted. You're a special guy and I'm proud to have helped raise you. I feel, even if it's a lie, I think that would have worked better than having
her do it.
Because
it felt like, well, aren't we, like, we already know that. We already know you feel this way. These letters gave you this epiphany. Although I do think it's funny that we see a shot of some of the letters that they're reading and there are purposeful misspellings.
Well, trying to make it look like kids wrote them. My final note is, for people who watch this, pay attention to all the extras in the stands.
Oh.
That was interesting.
It's not quite Woody Allen's Stardust Memories with the extras, but it's...
But every time I looked in the crowd, there was someone I pointed out, like, whoa, look at that person.
There's a man with some fabulous hair. I mean, maybe I'm just want to pay attention to that myself, but wow.
Sorry to everyone involved.
But speaking of Peña's, the kind of coldness with which he's handled, also Don Cheadle. He clearly is supporting Anthony Robles, but there's none of the moment that has characterized a lot of sports dramas, like where it's this relationship. The Fire Inside, very recent example of it. It's this relationship which is really conducive for this young person excelling.
I agree, and the movie feels long. It's a little over 2 hours, right?
Yes.
It feels long, and it's ironic that I feel like I didn't get a lot, but I think it's because we're doing a lot.
It's doing a lot, but in the most standard way. And I just don't understand why Mr. Goldenberg thought this was the story he needs to, cut his teeth on as a director. I don't know.
If people haven't seen The Fire Inside, I would recommend that over this.
I agree.
If you only have time for one sports-related underdog story.
Contemporary, yeah.
I like her story better. But what would you give Unstoppable?
Unfortunately, a 2, and I think that's a really high score for this film.
I didn't think this was successful. I'm sorry. I would give it 2 out of 5. Join us on Patreon and listen to our podcast. Bye.